What's up, basketball fans? Welcome to the Warriors Report. It's time to talk about the Toronto Raptors and, in particular, Gary Trent Jr. It was being reported by NBA Central. Competing executives around the league don't expect the Raptors to retain Gary Trent Jr., according to Eric Pincus. Now, I'm not saying this rumor is false. I always find it very interesting when this kind of stuff is being reported. In this case, it's saying competing executives. Now, obviously, the Raptors do have a lot of interesting pieces, and one of them is Gary Trent Jr. So I'm going to be talking about Gary Trent Jr.'s situation here, whether or not the Raptors should bring him back, what they can potentially look to do with him in free agency. I'm also going to be highlighting a few teams that I think could target him, and we're also going to be discussing the Raptors' salary cap situation as well. So if you're ready to watch this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you wish to hit the subscribe button as well, that would be very much appreciated. So with that being said, let's get into today's video. Now, unfortunately, there's no shout out for today's video because no one got the trivia question correct. It was actually Jimmy Butler. But let's talk about Gary Trent Jr. I want to quickly highlight his statistics before I give you my decision on where I think the Raptors stand with Gary Trent Jr. Now, taking a look at his statistics, he's played in the NBA since 2018-2019, where he started out with the Portland Trail Blazers. And looking at the Raptors, I mean, for 2.5 seasons now, he did get traded at the NBA trade deadline. He's averaged 16 points, 18 points, and 17 points in the last 3 seasons, while shooting around the 40% mark the last couple of seasons. His three-point shot has been really good. But it seems like Gary Trent Jr., when you look at some of the other categories, including things like rebounding, assists, for someone who's listed at 6'5", you've really got to question whether or not he can add more to his game. Now, he is only 24 years old. That is a big factor, I think, in this decision, what the Raptors do decide to do with Gary Trent Jr., but when you take a look at his statistics, it's been several seasons now, almost 3 seasons into the NBA. You can see he's averaging 15 points, and it almost seems like he's plateaued. Now, I'm not saying he cannot get any better, but it seems like that's pretty much what his role is going to be in the NBA, where he's a great three-point shooter, and he's not doing much else besides getting steals. Now, I do want to highlight some things before a lot of Raptors fans say we should retain Gary Trent Jr. under any circumstances. Now, obviously, the Raptors do have a few things to take into consideration, talking about when we talk about retaining Gary Trent Jr. or letting him go. And one of them is obviously three-point shooting. The Raptors are a terrible three-point shooting team. And on top of that, they need scoring in half-court offense. They're not a great offensive team, which makes it a little bit tough to let Gary Trent Jr. go. But when we talk about some of these other categories, when you take a look at assists, when you take a look at rebounding, I want to talk about some stats regarding Gary Trent Jr. Let's take a look at these numbers here. Now, taking a look at these numbers, these are really worrisome about Gary Trent Jr. This is something I've always felt about Gary Trent Jr., where I feel like he's a great scorer, great three-point shooter, but he doesn't contribute in any other area of the game. Sure, he gets you a lot of steals, but he's not a great defender. And when you take a look at these numbers, you take a look at some of the very important statistics, like for someone who's listed at 6'5" for Gary Trent Jr., take a look at the number of games with more than 5 rebounds. He's had 2 games this entire season where he's had more than 5 rebounds a game. Number of games with less than 3 assists, 47. And when you go down the list here, it just gets uglier and uglier. For someone who's supposed to be a shooting guard, yes, I get it. He's someone who's trigger happy, but look at the numbers here. Number of games with 0 assists for Gary Trent Jr., 15. That is unacceptable. And taking a look at the number of games he's played this season, 66. So you're telling me out of the 66, for those of you who want to do the math, less than 3 assists, 47 games, 47 out of the 66 games he's had less than 3 assists. Now, I know people are going to pinpoint to the fact that Fred had the ball a lot, Pascal and Scotty were the main distributors on the team, and heck, even Jakob Poeltl. But for Gary Trent Jr., anytime he gets the ball, it's almost as if he's not even looking to pass. He's constantly looking for his own shot, which is a little bit of a concern. Look, you have Fred VanVleet, obviously, who's averaging 7-8 assists this season, but we know he's not a tremendous passer. Then you got someone like Gary Trent Jr., who's looking for a shot first, and then you really got a question, like, where's the production going to come from your backcourt in terms of passing, right? So I think this is one of the reasons why I believe the Raptors absolutely need to move on. But the Raptors aren't a team that just lets people go for nothing. Gary Trent Jr. is someone they traded for Norman Powell, and there are definitely different scenarios they can go in terms of sign-in trades. Now, in terms of speaking of teams which I think could potentially target Gary Trent Jr., I think it's very important to mention that a lot of teams don't have a lot of salary cap this offseason during free agency, which actually benefits the Toronto Raptors, because out of the teams that do have a lot of salary cap, most of them are lottery teams and are looking to rebuild. And obviously, Gary Trent Jr., unless he wants to be a number 2 option on Charlotte Hornets, or excuse me, the Orlando Magic, which I don't even think he would be, you really got a question. I think one team that comes to mind when you think of sign-in trades for partnering up with Toronto Raptors is the LA Lakers. Gary Trent Jr. played in California, but he played basketball in California growing up, in college, I believe, or high school. So that's a perfect place for him to go. You need LeBron James and Anthony Davis to be surrounded by 3-point shooters. Now, obviously, in terms of who you could target, Austin Reeves, but the issue there becomes that Austin Reeves is not going to be getting paid $20 million unless the Lakers are absolutely crazy. And obviously, this trade, personally, I think would benefit the Raptors because Austin Reeves can do so much more than just scoring. I think this is the one that the Lakers could definitely target. I don't know how Laker fans feel about trading Austin Reeves in a sign-and trade for Gary Trent Jr. I think you may have to throw in one other player to kind of make the salaries match a little bit, because if Gary Trent Jr. is opting out of his player option, it is expected that he's probably going to be getting paid $22, $21 million as a starting point in his years. And obviously, there are some other teams as well I think you could really look at. Someone like the Charlotte Hornets could be interesting as well. They have some interesting pieces there that they could target. I believe it was Jillian McDaniels that was being rumored around a few weeks before the NBA trade deadline. That was being rumored as a target for the Raptors. And obviously, Gary Trent Jr.'s name was also being thrown in there as well. So again, it's one of those situations where if teams are signing and trading, you obviously have to take salary into consideration, but they would likely have to throw in another piece because Jalen McDaniels isn't going to be getting paid around $20 million or even $18 million. So that's just my thoughts. I think those are the two teams that come to mind when I think of teams that could potentially target Gary Trent Jr. But regardless of which teams may be interesting, I think the best option for the Raptors is to do a sign and trade. And if not, you know what, just bring him back for a couple of years, because when you look at the original contract that was signed by the Toronto Raptors and Gary Trent Jr., it was only a 2-year contract. So obviously, Gary Trent Jr. wasn't necessarily in the long-term plans for the Toronto Raptors, and I think it was a mutual agreement between both parties. Now, obviously, I do want to highlight the salary cap portion of this as well, because the Raptors do have key free agents heading into this summer. Now, as mentioned, the Raptors do have key free agents heading into free agency. That includes Jakob Poeltl, who they traded their next year's first-round pick for, Fred VanVleet, and Gary Trent Jr. Now, Fred and Gary both have player options, and undoubtedly, they'll opt out and acquire, or at least try to sign a bigger deal, whether that's with the Raptors or elsewhere. And taking a look at the Raptors' salary situation here, I think it becomes a little bit tricky because obviously the Raptors are pressed up against the salary cap situation. $148 million was their team salary this year. And you take a look at the Raptors' starting five: Pascal, Fred, Gary, OG, and Jakob Poeltl, who will be making close to probably $18 to $20 million. Next year, all of a sudden, now you would have 5 starters if the Raptors were to bring all of them back and make $20 million each. And in this new NBA, it's just not sustainable to have 5 starters making $20+ million. And again, Pascal is due for an extension. OG is due for an extension as well. And eventually, you're going to have to pay guys like Scotty Barnes and Precious Achiuwa as well. So I think it really handicaps the Raptors' salary cap situation here if you bring all of them back. So if you do look to sign and trade someone like a Gary Trent Jr., I think you absolutely have to have maybe 2 guys that are making half of his salary. So at least that way you can acquire a few bench pieces and have Gary Trent Jr. on another team. And another thing I quickly want to mention, guys, regarding Gary Trent's situation with the Raptors is, for those of you guys, obviously we heard a lot of tension in the Raptors locker room, which was obviously a big issue as to why the Raptors didn't win a lot of games, led to a lot of players underperforming. Personally, I think Gary Trent Jr. is the X factor here. It's quite obvious. You watch the last Chicago game and you see Fred VanVleet making shot after shot, and you notice everyone on the bench is clapping except for Gary Trent Jr. I think that's a dead giveaway. It's obvious just by Fred's and Gary Trent Jr.'s body language. They're not the best of friends. I think there was a little bit of tension there. So again, if you're asking me personally, I really like Gary Trent Jr., but this is his second team, man. This is his second team where he's unhappy with his role. Although he didn't publicly state it, it was obvious that he wasn't happy coming off the bench. And look, that was a similar situation in Portland as well, right? He was a younger player then, and he was complaining about not getting playing time behind Damian and CJ McCollum, who were obviously the better players at that time. So you've really got to question Gary Trent Jr.'s attitude at this point. Like, he's a great team first guy where he's, obviously picking up guys like OG Anunoby. You love his style. You love how he embraces his team, but you got to question his attitude. He's at that age at 24 years old where he wants to become a starter, which is understandable. But also, I just don't think it's going to happen on the Toronto Raptors. So again, that's just my opinion on Gary Trent Jr. I think obviously if that's this case where Gary Trent Jr. was causing a lot of locker room issues, then obviously you have to move him. With all due respect to Gary Trent Jr., yes, he brings a lot of valuable assets in terms of shooting and scoring, which the Raptors do need, but not at the cost of locker room issues, man. Not at that cost. But I'm very curious to hear what you guys think. Unfortunately, there's no shout out, or excuse me, there's no trivia question for today's video. But if you do want a shout out, you can let me know in the comment section, guys. So let me know your thoughts on this Gary Trent Jr. situation. And with that being said, guys, that will be it for today's video. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you guys have yourselves a great day.